Welcome our Scott Ensign and our panel of media buyers and planners.
All right, thank you, Steve. That's what we say about Buffalo and Rochester, by the way. Who's ready to hear from some agency people? Oh, all right. Everyone who didn't cheer, we're pulling our budgets. All right. Okay. I have the privilege of being joined by two fantastic panelists today. I'm going to kind of moderate / also add some insight since we're all on the agency side. So I have Courtney Hanson and Kaitlyn Tuson with me. I'll let you two introduce yourselves just real quick.
Sure. I'm Courtney Hanson. I'm the VP of Media at Emory.
I'm Kaitlyn Tuson. I don't think this is working. Oh, no. There we go. Kaitlyn Tuson, VP of Strategy at Saatchi and Saatchi Wellness.
All right, great. Well, we're going to be talking about changes in patient behavior and how that's changing the patient journey and how media folks like the two of you and me are looking at that in terms of strategies. I do have some notes here. I'm not checking my Coinbase account unless it's time for me to retire in the middle of this panel. I'll let you know. So first of all, we just wanted to talk about, since this is about patient behavior and how things have changed, what specific things are you watching? Have you seen? We all know we don't need to catalog the craziness of the last couple of years, but what are the specific things that you've seen that have really changed the way that you're thinking about media planning and buying?
Yeah, I can start. I think in general, patients are really more skeptical than ever. That's certainly come across with COVID. And I think that's really changing the way that patients are searching for information. So one thing that we've really seen is the rise of HCPs as influencers across many platforms, but in particular TikTok. So patients are really searching for new ways to find information. They're doing their research for themselves, and they really want that like on-demand ways to troubleshoot or what next steps to take.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think, with so much more, digital integration into the patient journey, patients are really taking a lot more agency over their health. They're much more engaged. And, we've seen the adoption of telehealth and all of these, this whole digital ecosystem that patients can tap into. And, a few years ago, they weren't leveraging it. And now they definitely are. So they're much more empowered than they used to be.
It's incredible to me how that has accelerated in such a short period of time. I feel like the health world was probably a little bit behind, and there was a lot of probably pent-up demand for technology, and we're seeing that too. The things that people are willing to now do online and to seek out online versus more what I would call conventional avenues of healthcare have really been interesting. And so to that point, as we think about specifically, we all work on the media side here. How do you see that changing specifically, like from a tactical perspective, from a performance expectation perspective? How do you see that changing the way that you're putting media plans together? So what impact is that, the behavioral changes that we just talked about, what impact is that making on the plans themselves?
I think it really starts with, this patient-centered journey and looking at not just demographics as segments or individual attributes, but looking at patients as communities. And so figuring out the right way to target based on a specific community type of a mindset is a really great way for us to find resonance rather than starting with a platform like, oh, I know I'm going to utilize Meta, or I know I'm going to be running things programmatically. Let's add a little bit more of the psychographic and the behavioral attributes behind what connects various personas of these patients, and utilizing that as kind of our source of truth for how we want to tap various platforms to actually execute on that.
Yeah, no, I think the community piece is really important. I mean, I think in any disease state, right, you have these communities that are really supporting one another, and they're really engaging one another. And particularly when, we're running disease state awareness campaigns, for instance, right, there's a lot of stigmas. And so elevating that conversation and tapping into those communities are really key.
And that's an interesting way of looking at it, because I think that the sudden adoption of so much digital interaction has created a lot more touch points, and it has allowed us to invite patients into conversations. But I think that can also, at the same time, for an industry that I would call a little on the conservative side, let's say, with health, and we deal a lot with pharma at Butler Till, so certainly a conservative space for very legitimate reasons. So I'm wondering, as you are putting plans like that together, you mentioned TikTok. I know that can be a scary platform for people. We just had a conversation with one of our larger brands about Twitch, which, has been around for a long time and has about 2.5 million people watching it at any given time, but it's still kind of seen as a little bit of a scary place, partly because it's so user-generated. You can't really control the conversation going on there. So I'm wondering, what kind of tips would you have? What kinds of things have you seen that have allowed you to better integrate some of these things with the clients that you're working with?
Yeah, we really like to bring our clients, and more importantly, perhaps their MLR teams, along for the ride. So whether that is setting up an actual workshop with the MLR teams, our clients, and various agency representatives, as well as the platform-specific representatives. If I'm thinking about past example of standing up TikTok for a recent brand that we launched, having that workshop environment and doing a lot of the education for the MLR teams to understand the usage, what kind of safety parameters we can put into place so that it becomes less scary, is really key, I think, specifically for pharma, because I agree that's definitely a hurdle, but I would really encourage brands, clients to lean on their agency partners to help bring that to life. You don't have to shoulder that yourself. We can work with you to figure out the right way to kind of step MLR teams through that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, I think partnership is definitely key. We all spend a lot of time and investing into our segments, right, and really understanding them. And at the end of the day, it's really about looking at who is where, right? And if that community is on TikTok, then the brand needs to be there, right? And I think when you can partner with your media agencies and show that data to prove that, hey, this is where our audience is, so we need to come up with a strategy of how to engage with them. I think that sort of makes it a much easier decision.
Yeah, I love the idea of holding workshops and bringing everyone together to just talk about the opportunity. We deal not just with pharma, because apparently we like regulation. We also deal with a lot of financial services. And so we're used to these kind of risk-reward conversations. And if you can paint the picture of kind of the reason that you're doing it, I think a lot of times these things can go into a compliance team or MLR without a lot of business context of why it's important. I mentioned Twitch before. We're having similar conversations about other in-game advertising, and I feel like the default answer is often no until you can kind of prove why there's a real reason for a brand to take that step. So I love the idea of holding a workshop, of setting that business context. I've also found that doing those not as one-offs, but kind of as a group of things that are related can be helpful too, because it helps to set really a larger business context. So if we're going to talk about Twitch, let's also talk about other things that we're doing in game. Maybe even if we really want to blow people's minds, let's talk about the metaverse, things like that we've seen be effective. So that's kind of where we are now. Where do you see things? I mean, a little bit of prognostication, if you will. Where do you see things going over the next 3 to 5 years? If we're in this place now where the patients maybe are over-indexing or a little bit ahead of the brands in terms of their willingness to engage. And for, like I said, very legitimate, understandable reasons, brands in the health space and the pharma space are a bit reticent to participate in some of those conversations along the way. How do you see that playing out over the next few years?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I think there are many different ways. I mean, I think, I think one of the topics that we were all emailing back and forth about, we talked about D&I. I think we all recognize that consumers are very keen on brands who take a stance and are willing to help to drive social change. And I think that creates a great opportunity for brands to participate in those conversations and really help to set themselves apart.
I think we really need to continue to lean into new ways of targeting. So if we think about some synergies that we see on the consumer side of our businesses and the demise of cookies and leaning into contextual targeting, something I'm perhaps a bit surprised on is how prescriptive, pardon the pun, our pharma clients are with exactly who it is they want to target. I either have this exact HCP list that I want to match, or I only want to treat someone who is already being diagnosed with whatever this condition is. And I think going back to how we started this conversation and trends in a patient-centered journey and them doing their own diagnoses, there's a much wider net that we could be casting, especially if we're looking at intent-based targeting, which is really where context kind of comes into play there. So I think with cookies going away, the pharma industry, healthcare industry in general, really needs to start to get ahead of the curve and moving away from the past user behavior segments and looking more into where should we be ahead of where a patient might be looking to discover us.
Yeah, good news is Walgreens is still selling cookies, I think. So we're not completely in the post-cookie world. Sorry. I apologize to everyone. I think the adoption, like meeting that patient where they are. So we mentioned patients are willing to seek out information. They want to interact with brands. There's a hunger there to establish trust, it seems to me. And one of the places that we've seen really low-hanging fruit and good results is from having more of a content strategy for our pharma brands and for our healthcare brands, as well as our financial services brands. I'll save that for the Financial Services Summit. But there's such a dearth of content out there and on the healthcare side, at least from the brand perspective. And it seems like everyone has kind of been willing to cede that space to the endemics of the world. And we've found that when a brand participates in that, if you look at things like search engine optimization and building content around what people are seeking out and the digital discovery phase of that, there's so much out there to be had. And especially if you look beyond one treatment or one kind of acute area that you're dealing with, there's just a ton of opportunity that we've found. So that's something that we've found to be really, really useful. And I guess on that same theme, so Steve made it clear to me, if every person in this room does not go away with an actionable insight, they're gonna quit feeding me at this conference. So really would love to have just your quick takeaways. Like if you could leave all of us with kind of one thing that we should be thinking about, that we should be doing, what would that be?
I think we've been talking for a while about brands needing to have their own data, the first-party data, and I think we've gotten a lot of brands there. I think what needs to happen is actually utilizing it. So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, not just having a prescriptive target list, but what can I glean from a mindset standpoint about these various personas and utilize that for new ways of targeting.
Yeah, and I'll take that a step further. I think absolutely when we're looking at our different stages of our patient journeys, it's critical to look at the drivers and barriers and to leverage data, right, to continuously learn and the execution of it, right? We need the right teams that are willing to be agile and continuously optimize our campaigns. I mean, it's not, we can't just, read the data a month later. I mean, we really have to be actively learning about our patients along the way and inserting those learnings into our campaigns consistently.
Yeah, and I think that use of technologies, as we've talked about, the patient is becoming more digitally savvy and willing to engage with brands in those channels. So the use of technology there is very important. So one example that we've been really leaning into is moving as much as we can, particularly for our pharma clients, who, as I said, they really like the endemics for good reasons. It's premium inventory, it's safe inventory, it's contextually relevant inventory. That's something that has been important to pharma even before all of these issues around privacy, because the privacy issues, are, it's like all the people who were working from home before the pandemic, now they're the pros. It's like pharma is the pros in terms of already getting privacy and understanding contextual because they've been doing it for so long. But we have found that when we're able to leverage really progressive buying strategies and technology against those dollars, we see excellent results. So programmatic is the perfect example. And pharma has been a little bit behind in the programmatic space. And for, again, as I've said before, maybe I'll just quit caveating this, for very good reasons and reasons that everyone can understand. But where we have moved things from kind of more IO-based manual buys into that programmatic space, we've seen tremendous results. And I'm talking about like 5 times the return on ad spend on things like audience quality and script lift in the pharma space, just by pooling that stuff together, using technology, using that real meaningful, tight performance feedback loop to drive results. We've seen it work really, really well.
I'll also just add that's a great way to get around the numerous walled gardens that are continuing to be stood up. So being able to execute across multiple channels with a singular provider in a programmatic buying method kind of ties up all of your efforts really nicely, so that you can actually calculate that 5 times impact rather than trying to estimate, well, I did really well over here on my Meredith properties and Condé Nast did a great job over here, but I don't have a holistic view of how everything is performing.
Yeah, and that's been there's nobody here from a walled garden, right? So we can talk some smack about those people. That's been a real challenge for us. And in every case, we're trying to get the brands that we work with to invest in their own data assets. And I know that sounds kind of trite, but it's so important. And the one thing about, I'm so tired of talking and hearing about the cookie, but the one really great thing about that going away is I think it has invited us to be a lot more strategic and a lot smarter. So necessity is the mother of invention in this case. And now we can make the case to our clients to stop just renting this behavioral data that's out there and never was going to be a sustainable way to do this kind of marketing. And invest in your own data, like build your own strategies and that's a way for you to also gain a competitive advantage. Because if you're just buying the same stuff as everybody else under the same parameters as everyone else, you're not going to be able to gain an advantage in the marketplace. And so I think that's a real opportunity for marketers on the brand and the agency side. I think we're going to take a few questions now in the last few minutes that we have.
Yeah, we do. We have time for questions. So if you have questions, raise your hand. Yep.
Hello, I'm Crystal Walton from GSTV. I'm a big proponent of insights to action, and so we spoke a little bit on the panel about patient-centered journey and how you've leveraged insights. So I'd love to hear a story about how you found a insight that was kind of different. You didn't think about it, and maybe how you transitioned it to a new action.
Ooh, anyone want to take that?
I can start. We work on one brand that we actually discovered that it supports COPD, and discovered that there was a surprising amount of traction and interest with NASCAR. So that was something that we used to lean into bringing to life a NASCAR sponsorship. That kind of goes, Scott, with what you were saying about having additional ownable content. Our brand has really leaned into that as well, and leverages all kinds of B-roll and things that appeal to that audience to kind of create more of a halo strategy with that segment, that persona, as part of our overall COPD activation. So that's one example.
Another example I can share is in the women's health space. There was, we identified that there was a lot of interest in audio, and I think we've all recognized that there's been a rise in all kinds of audio, right? And so we tapped into that insight and developed a full content strategy, and it's absolutely working well.
And one thing that we've seen is, of course, the brands that we work with have seen some diminishing returns in kind of broad-based linear TV and have been looking for other options. And so we've been running a lot of data-driven linear TV through a partner, and we were running that for a treatment for ulcerative colitis. And the audience that we were hitting with the insights that we got back from this partner were, this is a very, very heavy 65 plus audience. But one of the surprising things that we found about that audience was that the number one thing that they index for in terms of like what are they more likely to do than the general population is play video games. And that probably is not Call of Duty in this case, although I'm sure some of them are playing Call of Duty, but mobile games, games on tablets and phones. And so we've been able to engage with them in some conversations about getting in front of that audience in those environments.
Could I ask you two to follow up on that question of TV and where you're reallocating TV? Faz, I think, alluded to it when she talked about how pumping a lot of media into a particular community didn't necessarily work as they expected. I assume a lot of that has to do with TV. I'm curious, where are you moving away from TV, how and why?
I have some hot sports opinions about TV, and I just feel like pharma targeting in TV has to be done better. And if I think about my own experience, I'm sitting at home with my kids, and every third ad is for a drug that is not pertinent to anyone in my household. I just see a lot of waste, and so why not shift that budget to a programmatic type of a buy? Or to a new platform where our audience actually is, not just is, but is actually engaging. To me, that drives more of an impact than, taking a modeled approach to ensuring I'm getting a 90% reach with a 7x frequency, but may not actually be translating in the real-time user behavior results. So I am a heavy proponent of moving away from linear TV. If you're going to be running on CTV, which of course makes sense, I'm not saying TV doesn't make sense, but working with a partner that can understand a full funnel view of the exposure from a CTV ad and measure that down funnel conversion, I think has to be done.
Yeah, and we've never really been a big TV shop. We've been much more digitally focused for a while. So a lot of the clients that we work with are dealing with another partner on TV. And so, we're a bit incentivized to make the case for kind of more digital addressable formats. But I totally agree with Courtney that if there is something that you can target much more audience focused, even contextually focused, I'm a big fan of Jeopardy. And you would think that you were sitting in the doctor's office watching Jeopardy. It's just one pharma ad after another, broadly targeted. And probably someday I'll have all of those conditions, but right now I do not, thankfully. So I think $1, like spend everything that you can. We don't have a TV team. We don't have like a digital video team. We have a holistic video team that's handling strategies that look across all of those things. And so I think if you're going to do linear, you've got to do it in a way that's more data-driven today.
I wanted to get Kaitlyn in on this because both of you have been talking and praising programmatic. Traditionally, pharma especially has been leery of programmatic, the ways in which it's targeting people with specific ailments. It all seems very creepy. It makes people ask, where's this data coming from? How do you know me? So we've seen, pharma especially has been the last of the great contextual advertisers. They want you on that page at WebMD that's outlining your disease. Kaitlyn, how do you feel about this move towards programmatic? How do you talk to clients about programmatic as a safe place for them to be, and that it's actually a very effective way, even for pharma?
Yeah, I mean, I've been advocating for programmatic since 2017, 2018. So, I think linear TV does serve a purpose. I think for the right brand and for the right audience, it makes sense. But I think, you really have to look at the insights that you're gathering about your segments and recognize where they are and what messages are appropriate for what channels, right? So, I think having the right mix and shifting away from just, this basic, well, this is how much we spent last year on linear TV, so let's just do it again next year. Really look at how you're allocating that and where your audiences are, and make sure you're delivering the right messages and shift if that's what you're seeing them do.
Kaitlyn, Courtney, I'm sorry, you mentioned profiling, changing in profiling, and data points and psychographics. This, of course, is part and parcel of programmatic. But this seems to connect to something that Foz was saying as well, that one of the things that digital is doing is changing our understanding about the customer and their attitudes towards healthcare and their situations, and how that reflects, that impacts a great deal about their attitudes towards healthcare. Can you tell us a little bit about the key data points that you're finding and using in these digital channels that sort of opens up this idea of who this customer is and the various things you need to account for in the range of views that customers bring to this?
Sure. We work on one platform that is similar, kind of describing what you were, Scott, where you place a pixel, you get insights back on not just like who your target is, if I'm thinking like old school MRI, Kantar readouts, but also the psychographics and behaviors of the people who were served your ad or who are interacting with your site. And so figuring out like what are the synergies between those two and really getting an understanding of the psychographics behind it. So thinking about some research we're doing for a new-to-market drug, we have also seen a heavy over-index in gaming, but let's explore a little bit why are they heavy indexing into gaming. And the psychographics are that they have had to essentially live like a recluse for the last 2 years with COVID. And so they've been searching for communities to engage with and feel more like part of something. So having that kind of social interaction is what's leading them into gaming. And so now we can use that as an additional kind of insight to layer onto, okay, it's not just gaming, and so I'm going to look at these platforms, but what's the right way to build some resonance within those platforms that's really going to drive an impact for that brand.
It's not just where the eyeballs are, but why they're there.
Exactly.
And I think that's like a really key element that we're starting to get at this layer of data now, is not understanding what the channels they're choosing, and you got to put the money there, you got to be in front of them, but there's a why that's attached to that, and that's got to more deeply inform the way you message them and the way you come at them.
Yeah, which I think is unique to the pharma space. I mean, if someone is in a place in that context, they're often seeking information. And just to go back to the programmatic question that you had, programmatic, I think it has become a little bit synonymous with this really specific addressable audience targeting that everyone kind of fell in love with a decade-ish ago. But it's not like programmatic can't be contextual. And so we have set up a lot of private marketplaces, smart private marketplaces for contextual advertising through programmatic, where the main value proposition is not necessarily an increase in addressability, although that can also be part of it, but really scale and efficiency and automation, which to me is what really makes programmatic such a unique channel to do the things that we want to do, but to do them in a way that is more scaled and more efficient.
Scott, Courtney, Kaitlyn, thank you so much. This was really great. They're going to
Thank
be
you.
around for the next few days, so you can pick their brains. Thanks, guys.